Hey everybody, welcome back to Historians of the Movies podcast. I am your host and creator, Jason Herbert, and every single week we are bringing you movies and the histories behind them. And this week, we're talking about 1959's Gidget. And I wanted to do this film actually for the longest time. We don't do a lot of older films here on the pod. I think we tend to do things that may be super culturally relevant, but this film actually is. It is this movie that really changes surf culture, not only in the United States, but worldwide. And there is a huge amount of understanding we can have about California, about beach environments, about race, about relationships, about sex, by studying beach culture in Los Angeles. And somebody figured that out. And I'm talking about Elsa Devienne. She is a professor at Northumbria University. She's got this amazing new book out called Sand Rush. And I invited her on today to talk about Gidget, about her research, about writing this book for a French press, and then writing it for an American press. And this is a really interesting kind of duality between writing for different audiences, the difference between, say, writing an American history by not being an American, and all of the things that go along with it. This is such a cool conversation. I really dug sitting down with Elsa and talking about this film, which I think is super important, talking about her work, which is just magnificent. It's such a cool conversation. I do want to give you guys a quick heads up. Unfortunately, with this conversation, my audio was a little odd while we were recording, and I can't quite figure that out. It's unfortunately one of the things that happens with recording these pods. So if you don't mind ignoring the nonsense that is my voice to begin with, listen in. This is such a really neat conversation with just an amazing scholar. So I hope you sit back and relax. We're going to catch some waves because Gidget is next on Historians of the Movies podcast. Elsa Devienne, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Jason?
I'm excited because you are now the third professor from Northumbria to be on this podcast. I was doing the math earlier. It's like, of all places in the world to have three professors from one university on this pod, it's North of all places, really? Okay, so welcome to the pod.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, do you think it's the one place where you've had the most people from on AHTM? Like, is Northumbria an outlier?
You know what? I'm just trying to break into my homeland. My ancestry is all English, right? So the Herbert ancestor, or excuse me, my maternal line is Chadwick, is my mom's maiden name, and so I did our ancestry when my grandfather passed away a few years ago, and all of my ancestors on that side of the family go all the way back to this small little area outside Manchester years ago, back to like the 1100s. So I'm just trying to break into the homeland is what I'm trying to do right now. I'm trying to go back and like, hey, welcome me back into the fold here, I guess. I don't know. Are podcasts big in the UK? Do people listen over there?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, they're huge. Yeah, every news outlet has its own podcast, and yeah, UK universities are really into what they call knowledge exchange or impact. Like, we're really encouraged to come out of the ivory tower and show that public money, because universities here are partially publicly funded. So we're really being told to engage with the public in any ways possible. So podcasts are a thing that you can put on an application to get money from those government grants. So yeah, it's big now. I think Waitman, you had him on the podcast, right? So he's doing a podcast at the moment, and he's like, you know what? It's impact.
I helped him launch it. Yeah, he's been great, and I promise you, I'm going to help you lower the bar here today. So we're just going to bring the standards down. And that'll help any future grant applications that you've got. Just anything else, went on HATM. I threw him a bone. It was, oh my gosh, do I see behind you? Do I see a copy, a picture of your of the book? I do.
Yes,
I see a book cover. So
I did this on purpose.
Oh, did you? All right. I am so excited because we're talking today about the movie Gidget. But also your book, Sand Rush, The Revival of the Beach in the 20th Century Los Angeles. Okay, so I have to tell you, I saw a picture of your book somewhere on the interwebs, something like that, and tracked you down because of it. I was like, I need to talk about this book. I am so excited to talk to you. I've had a chance to read through most of it. So far, I haven't gotten all the way through. As I kind of prepped up for this pod, and it was something that I was really looking forward to as well. And for those of you listening, I don't even have like the actual book yet. I have the spiral bound. Was this the proof book? Is this?
Yeah,
I
think so.
Is that what they sent to me?
Yeah.
I was looking. I was like, oh man, this is so cool. I I love the way you write, and I love this so much. So I'm so happy. Before we jump into this movie and your book, let's talk about you though. Let's introduce you, the third professor, but first in our hearts, from Northumbria University. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about who you are and the kind of work you do?
Yeah, so I'm Elsa. I work at Northumbria University, where I'm a historian of the US and the environment. That's what I teach here. I've been here for 5 years in the UK, but I actually, if you can hear or maybe not hear from my accent, I actually come from France. I grew up in Paris. I did my PhD in France, and actually the book came out first in French, with the Édition La Sorbonne, with Sorbonne University Press, if you want. In 2020, in March 2020, which I really recommend as a date to publish your book, because it was the date that we all went into lockdown. So I actually didn't get a copy of my book for like a good 2 months. Like the book existed, but I didn't have a copy of it because they were all like locked somewhere in a warehouse somewhere in France. Anyway, so I did my PhD in France on the US, and I did spend a year as a postdoc in the US at Princeton. And then I got a job in France, and eventually, for personal reasons, I wanted a job in the UK, and I've always wanted to publish my book, obviously, in the US. So yeah, that made sense to I wanted this to be read by Angelinos. I wanted it to be read by people who love the beach, who love, Hollywood movies about the beach, who love LA in general. And yeah, so my work basically is, I would say I'm a historian of the environment, and also of an urban historian and a historian of bodies. Inevitably, if you work about beaches, you're going to have to talk about bodies as well. So that's what I do. Yeah.
I'm so excited. I don't know if you do or not. I grew up in Louisiana. When I was a little boy, speaking Cajun French, which is, of course, just an awful, awful, awful version of, in my mind, the most beautiful language there is. And my French now is absolute merde. But I try, every now and then. Like when I went to Prague 2 years ago, I got to fly Air France for the first time and loved it. It was like they were throwing wine and cheese at me the second I got on the plane to Miami, and this champagne. I was like this. Oh my gosh, I had a blast. But they started, they were speaking in English and in French on the flight. And for some reason, I kind of understood. I was able to bullshit my way through my rudimentary French the whole time, until I got to Prague, of course. And then I learned how to speak like 2 words in Czech, which were, beer and please. So that was that's my French experience.
No, I'm not going to send you my book in French, so I'm glad.
Oh, no, I want your book in French. Are you kidding me? Please. I was actually going to ask you for that, because it was the first thing I noticed. As historians, we shouldn't assume, right? But I didn't know anything, about you before I started looking into your work. And so I'm looking at the book and I'm like, oh, they're translated. I'm like, why would there need why? And then I realized, as I started to read your acknowledgments, which are my favorite parts of any book.
Yeah, and the acknowledgments are basically a story of how the book, came into being, and is essentially almost a second book, even though it's a first book. It's adapted from my PhD thesis. But I really rewrote it, as a book, differently, because it's not the same. A French book, a French academic book is not an American UP academic book, and you don't write the same way. For French people who may never have been to LA, you don't write the same way as you would for an American audience that would have a much more closer relationship to those beaches, to that place, that city.
Yeah, and I wonder, especially, you wrote this coming out of your dissertation. It comes out in the book at first in the French press, and then I would imagine as you went back to revisit it, as time goes on, you start to think about different things. You want to revise it. There's always those nagging bits as you write.
I mean, exactly. Basically, I had the opportunity of a redo. I had to get my French book out quite a bit more quickly than I would have liked, because I needed to have a job in the UK, and the REF was happening. The REF is the Research Excellence Framework, and it's like this big national review of how is every department in the country in different universities doing in terms of research. So I needed to have a book out for the REF because that's how I needed to get a job. So I got the book out in French, which it's a good book, but it wasn't my dream book. The book you have in your head, I was like, the one that's really going to nail the argument, the one that's really going to be like, what you always imagine as your book to be. And I feel like I got this opportunity to do a redo. And I actually got some Francophone historians, Isaac Plan being one of them, who reads French, read the book, and was like, what about this? What about that? And he helped me. Basically, he was a great reader. And you know what? I really pushed my thinking and made it a much better book. And I have zero regrets. You know what? With that second book, I rewrote the damn book like once.
I love it.
PhD,
I love it. I'm so
French
excited.
book. Yeah, like it's the best.
Wait, do you find now that you're done with it, you're like, okay, I'm finally able to move on to something else.
Oh yeah.
I'm ready for you to write a Florida Beach book, by the way. That's what I'm asking you to write, is like come down and write a book about the Keys would be lovely after reading this.
Yes.
But I want to ask you actually one of the, before we jump into this movie, because there were a couple things when I first saw your book, I was like, oh man, Point Break would be perfect, except for we just did Point Break for the podcast, and you and I had even talked about that. And then I thought about Gidget being like really, in a lot of ways, so much the embodiment of some of your work. So, and I want to jump into that. But before we do so, I just have this question, because I think right now in history, we seem to be going through these real battles over who should be writing what and things like that, this idea of internal versus external. I know that in my own fields, there's this real fight between insiders and outsiders and things like that. And I don't want to be negative here at all. That's not the point of this. But I'm kind of wondering, how does a French scholar come to be fascinated with the history of California beaches in the middle of the 20th century or the early 20th century?
Well, I'm going to take a little detour here, saying, Northumbria, you started with saying like, oh, how come we've had 3 historians from Northumbria here? Well, what I love about Northumbria in our department is that we have a lot of people like me. Like we have Laura, who's Irish, who writes about French history. Then we have Waitman Bourne, who writes about Ukraine and is from the US. And then we have me, who's French but write about the US. And we have many cases like this in the department where you would not expect that person to write on that history, but it is what it is. And actually, I don't feel weird at Northumbria. Like, this is the place where I've never felt weird for being a French person working about the US. So I love that aspect. And I guess what happened here is that fundamentally, if I really go like the psychoanalytical way, I think deep inside growing up in France, I always felt that race was a thing that was a bit taboo to talk about. Because of the universal ideal of France, we're all the same. Race doesn't matter. Race is not a word you should use. And I think growing up in a diverse neighborhood in Paris, I always knew that there was this thing that I couldn't name, but that was different. I'm white, and I could tell that there was a difference, And I think what I was initially, and I think it's the case for many American historians who are French, you're attracted to the US because you can talk about race. Historians talk about race. It's right there. It's front and center. You can't avoid it. And for me, it allowed me to put words into my experience and that I just didn't have before. And I didn't want to talk about race in the French context because I think it's too close. It's too epidermic. Like I just cannot have the necessary distance to talk about race in France in the ways I would want to as a historian. I think I've also always been fascinated by the US. I'm a 1990s kid, and I think at that point, the US, I don't know, it was just our entire culture was just the US, the US, the US. And I think I was just fascinated by the place, by its culture, independent movie, literature. And so that's how, and turns out we have very good historians of the US and France that can train you very well. I was trained at the Ecole des Hautes Etudes en Sciences Sociales, the HESS, and there's a great center of North American studies there. Yeah, that's how it happened. So interestingly enough, the book started as an interest in how beaches were segregated. That was my interest for my master's. And from there, I realized that there was actually a bigger story there about the beaches of LA in particular. and not just through the race question. I can't even remember what your original question was, but I hope I've answered it.
No, you hit a bunch of them actually. So, because your book does so many different things, it's one of the reasons as I started to read through it, I was like, oh wow, she's doing so many different cool things. Really environmental history, but you're also talking about bodies, you're talking about race, politics, development, things like that. All these kind of different things, and one of the cool things about history is you can take this seemingly innocuous thing, the beach, and then talk about changes in human civilization and how we as humans relate to one another on so many different levels. And I think your book is really, really successful about that. In the English version, I don't know about the French because the English is clearly better. But oh God, I'm going to sit with the French book and just the English and be like, okay, this word means whatever. So no, and I think one of the things I really like what you're doing here is to really applaud. You mentioned Laura and Waitman, obviously, and there are just tons and tons of other scholars. I've always admired folks who come from outside, if you will, to have this fascination. I think certainly there, if this book had been written by, say, an Angelino, it might have a different feel to it. And there's some really beautiful stuff coming out. Natalia Molina's most recent book she came out with, talk about, if you know this book, Place at the Nairi, talking about her family's restaurant and Mexican American communities, just beautiful stuff.
Absolutely.
Right? And you can write this beautiful, very real, personal history. At the same time, you can come from without and be like, hey, this is what I see and this is what's cool about it, or this is what's ever. So
absolutely. And that's what I see. I cannot do the kind of public history or the kind of history inspired by your personal story. I can't do that. And I admire so much people who do that. But I'm an outsider. And just as a sort of side note, one thing, though, is that, I started looking into this through the angle of race, and I moved a bit sideways because first I saw an opportunity. I saw, the LA Beach is such an iconic place and there's not a book on it. What the hell? Right. And also, I saw the beaches and I was like, they don't look like the French ones at all. Why did you guys build a highway on it? Why do you have why do you have buildings on it and houses? So that was a parking lot. The first thing you see when you arrive at Santa Monica is a huge parking lot. What the hell? Who thought about this? So that's where my Frenchness was interesting. But at the same time, I wanted to move away from race because personally, I felt that this wasn't my story to tell. And I just knew that, that I'm going to leave that to somebody to tell. And I think Alison Rose Jefferson wrote a fantastic book on African-American leisure sites in California. It's called Living the California Dream. And she did an amazing job looking into the archives and also interviewing African-Americans who still live or used to live on the west side of LA. And this is the work I can't do, especially as someone who doesn't live there. And also Alison is a Black woman. And I think, that you have to think of these questions as well. And I felt like I could write a book about the beaches, but not necessarily a book about race.
Well, I want to talk about this. This movie turns out to be, it feels like not only an artifact, an artifact, but an active participant in the development of the California beach scene in a lot of ways. This movie comes out in 1959. I think this is the oldest film we've now done on the podcast. So I'm kind of curious to see if people kind of gravitate towards this. When I announced this on Twitter that we were going to do this film, a lot of folks say, oh my gosh, I love this movie. And I don't know if people are going to come to it or not, but I sure hope so, because it's such an important film to talk about, especially in relevance to your work. So your book starts in the 1920s. Gidget comes out in 59. Can you set the stage, Elsa, about what is the California beach scene in the 1920s, and how does this change maybe before, as we head towards the war years and kind of afterwards?
Yeah. So basically, I started the book in the 20s because towards the end of that decade, there's a wide sense among elites in LA that the beaches are in crisis. And that's because the city is going through its boom years. Lots of people are arriving. And the beaches are crowded. It's fewer and fewer spaces along the coastlines are open for development. It's kind of a haphazard development. The beaches are eroded due to constructions that are not taking into account the way the ecosystem of the beach works. They are polluted due to the oil exploitations or sewage. So they're polluted, they're crowded. A lot of them are still private, difficult to access. So private, eroded, polluted. Basically, there's a sense that LA as a promise of a place that you go to experience nature is that this promise is not being fulfilled, and that visitors and new residents are just going to be disappointed. And so the elites start this, especially the Chamber of Commerce starts this big program to try to get the beaches into a better shape, and that leads in the 30s to like all these what I call the beach lobby, which is basically these organizations that are set up around then with business leaders and engineers and public officials that decide to save the beach from decline. So obviously the beaches are not that bad, but there is, there are problems. And particularly in the 30s, Santa Monica and Venice are two beaches that are suffering a lot from erosion, literally like beaches that disappear like in front of like people's very own eyes. And the things get worse as nothing is really done throughout the 40s. So at that point, it really, they have all these plans and these reports of what we should do. Beaches should be public, they say. That's the first thing they say. Like if LA is going to be like a big metropolis, if it's going to keep on attracting residents and tourists, it needs to have public beaches. And second of all, we need to like fix that erosion problem. And we need to feed the beaches. We need to bring more sand to the beaches to fix that problem that we've created by building all these piers and these various constructions on the beach. And the third thing is it has to be clean. We have to buy more beaches for the public so they're not as crowded, and we have to provide modern accommodation. And so in the post-war period, that beach lobby gets the attention of the Congress of the state of California, which starts spending a lot of money on the beaches, extending them, like artificially nourishing the beaches, like taking sand literally from dunes and dumping them on the sand. And it works. They literally create like these enormous beaches that we know now in LA. They're really enormous. That's thanks to the post-war beach modernization program. That's what I call the beach modernization program. And so the beaches of that period, the 50s, they're being completely transformed, because in a short period of time, they're going to be enlarged. They're going to be bought for the public. Like, before the war, you have fewer public beaches than private beaches in LA. After the war, that proportion changes, and you have 60% of the LA County beaches that are public. So they're public. More modern accommodations are built on them, and they just become, what you and I expect from a modern beach. Like wide berth of sands with like lifeguard towers and public toilets, highways, parking lots, everything you'd want for a sort of middle class afternoon at the beach for a white family. Obviously it has consequences for those who don't fit the bill, but that's where we're at. Now, Gidget is filmed in Leo Carrillo State Beach in Malibu, which is a bit of a different story because Malibu is just very different. It's very narrow pocket beaches flanked by high cliffs. They're a lot more they're a lot more in a, I guess, less developed at the time and still today, because for a long time Malibu was closed off to development up until basically the late 20s. So it has a bit of a particular story, Malibu, and it has So that's where we're at. Malibu, there aren't that many people going to those beaches still. It's still in some parts, like it's very much those are local beach. They're not as they don't attract as many people as a public beach like Santa Monica Beach would.
We're talking about Gidget, the film, and going through watching, this was actually my very first time watching this movie start to finish. I think most of us are familiar with the idea of Gidget, the zeitgeist. We've seen clips of Gidget. Maybe we've seen flipping through the channels, whatever, and so forth. We know who she is. And I think there's a general understanding that we associate Gidget with the beach blanket films of the 60s, certainly of the general, maybe now in the time period of 2024, of a general nostalgia of the beach. I'm watching this film, and as a historian, that ruins everything for me, because I watch these movies now and I'm like, wow, this is an entirely white cast.
Yeah.
I did not see a single person of color in this film. And I'm wondering, both as a reflection of who's in Hollywood at the time in 1959, maybe 58 as they're filming this, but Plus, what's the racial dynamics of the beach at this point in time? Without diving too much into your earlier work, where are the people of color? And are these beaches divided upon like ethnic lines as far as Jewish, Christian, other lines? Who's able to go to these beaches and where?
So in the 50s, in theory, all those beaches are accessible to anyone, regardless of race or religion, right? But Malibu, I was looking through my notes going through this. I mean, you still have a guy, for instance, a black engineer that moves in Malibu and is being told to that he can't rent because only white people can rent in Malibu. So you still have cases like this. And I think it was actually 1959, that case that I found. So, I mean, even non-locals who are white could find themselves subjected to verbal abuse in some parts of Malibu that are very local focused, like that's our beach and no one else should go. So I think basically in theory anyone can go anywhere in the 50s, but historically there are 2 black beaches in LA that have been used by black people because that's where they would feel safer. One is the Bay Street Beach, south of the Santa Monica Pier, which is a public beach, which was where black people would go and went up until the 60s, about then. And then there's another beach that has actually been a lot in the news lately, which is Manhattan Beach, the so-called Bruce's Beach in Manhattan Beach, that was actually a private beach. It was a private beach resort where the Bruces, a couple originally from New Mexico who moved in the 20s, so made available like a bathhouse, a lodge, dance hall, etc. And they were forced out from Manhattan Beach in the late 20s. And the reason it's been in the news is because the beach has been returned to the descendant, and it's the first time that we have a reparation actually enacted by, in this case, the LA County. So in other words, in the 50s, in theory, all the beaches are open to everybody, but black people tend to stick to public beaches south of Santa Monica, which are the, I guess, less wealthy, less upper class beaches. They tend to, congregate either in Cabrillo Beach, which is in San Pedro Bay, south of Los Angeles, not in the Santa Monica Bay, or they go to Santa Monica Beach, or they still hang out around, Bay Street Beach, also called the Ecole. But Malibu, like I said, is a very closed off, even to non-locals, and people can still experience racism. I mean, the Jonathan Club, which is a beach club in Santa Monica, was still refusing black people in the 70s, 80s, I think even 1990 potentially. So, it's very bad. And so there's the thing is that Gidget reflects that reality, is that you probably wouldn't see many black people on a Malibu beach. You would see them in Santa Monica and in other LA beaches, but Malibu would be very white for sure.
I'm wondering about, actually, we're talking about white and black, and of course there's certainly very diverse country here, but I'm also wondering about people of Hispanic heritage as well. Yeah. Are they facing the same levels of discrimination when it comes to where they can and cannot go along the beaches?
So yeah, they do. Especially, the evidence shows, and I think actually if anybody wants to get us students to work on a master's thesis on that, I think we need to know more about this. And there, I dig a little bit into it in the book, but in terms of what Asian Americans were doing or Hispanics in LA, we don't necessarily know much. But we do know that, for instance, in the 40s, young men, especially the so-called pachucos, the zoot suiters, are being told off from the beach, are not being accepted on the dance halls, are easily, being picked up by the police anytime something goes wrong. So they are suffering to some extent from racial profiling, and they are being very much told to get off the beaches. But it's not necessarily the case for every Hispanic person. It's mostly this is going to be particularly affecting young men and young women who wear certain clothes, etc. Asian Americans, we do also have some evidence of forms of discrimination, not necessarily on the beach, but on dance halls near the beach, or amusement parks on the piers. But we also have great photographs from the Los Angeles Library collections of Korean American on the 4th of July celebrating on the beach in the 1920s. These are absolutely beautiful photographs from personal albums that were collected by the librarian, and which do show that there was quite diverse group of people enjoying the beaches from the in the early 20th century onwards.
I'm kind of wondering now, we talk about this mixing of all these people, and predominantly with Gidget, it's white bodies that we see here. So I kind of want to move on here a little bit too, and you talk about this in the book as well. Also, let's talk about sex. And sexuality.
Yes.
The movie opens with a manhunt, which I was utterly unprepared for. I was like, wait. I was actually shocked at the overt sexuality of this film coming out in 1959 on the part of women. I had no idea about sexual norms. Of the time period.
I mean, they're going on a manhunt, but they're not going to have sex, Jason.
No.
These girls are not having sex. What they want a pin. They want the pin from the fraternity pin. They want to show that they have a boyfriend, right? That they want to show that they have a man. Not they're having sex with the men, because we're still in the 50s, where they're not supposed to. They're supposed to be good girl, not girl having sex, right?
I was just surprised by this. It's like the girls were there early on, and the four of them are sitting there on the beach, and they're like practicing their poses, and they're not getting the boys' attention. Then they've got to play the ball and throw the ball into the guys who are just completely oblivious, as most guys are at that age. At least I certainly was. And I was just, so I guess what's going on with the dating scene for how does the beach change relationships as far as dating throughout in the early 20th century, from say the 20s to the 60s? I think now we kind of associate the beach with a place where, if you get on Instagram, there's all sorts of influencers wearing God knows whatever. Has it always been that way, or does that relationship between, say, dating, companionship, and the beach change over time? What happens with this?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say is that as a woman myself, who's been, who was 16, because it's a movie about like a 16-year-old going through that summer of like discovery of sex and men and relationship. I remember, what's striking to me about that scene is how it reflects my experience as well. Like, again, in the 1990s, I remember going with my girlfriends to the beach and looking at the men and having that sense of like, you have to find a boyfriend for the summer, otherwise you're nothing. And that's what's a bit sad and striking, is that between the 50s and the 1990s, you still had a sense, there was still this pressure to conform, and in a very heterosexual manner, that, if you were a girl of any, worth your salt, you had to attract a man, and you had to come back with like that summer fling. And I feel like today it's different. Like, girls are allowed to just be themselves and enjoy themselves. And I don't know, that's the first thing that struck me as watching it. I was like, oh my God, yeah, not much change between them. Although now I feel like things are different, so that's good. The other thing about dating and sexuality on the beach is that, it's always been a place where you date, where you flirt. There are all those beach comedies from the 1900s, 1910s, 1920s. Max Sennett is a famous silent movie era director who filmed these beach comedies with these so-called bathing beauties, and it's all about like finding love on the beach. And so, you've always had those beach movies, like from the beginning of Hollywood. The beach is a place where you meet someone, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's also what happens in reality. Like, you have also a lot of flirting happening on the beach. I think the difference with the 50s is that you have the baby boomers, basically. The California becomes that very young state that welcomes all those baby boom families. And the kids have this enormous liberty. They have this freedom. They have money. They have pocket money. They can go to the beach. It's free. It's far from the parents' gaze. It's not the high school yard. It allows semi-nudity. It allows you to go with friends and meet other people. So it's the perfect place to date, And actually, it's that's why there are so many of these beach movies in the 50s, is because parents are obsessed with observing what happens on the beach. It's the mating side,
Yeah, the thing I also wasn't prepared for was this subplot of the parents trying to fix Gidget up
Yeah.
with some guy. It's like, I had assumed, and again, not saying, hey, Gidget, go have sex, but like, it was almost like our daughter's a good upstanding girl who needs a good upstanding guy. And this is almost like I felt like there was a sense of class at issue here with trying to assure that their daughter was being seen with the right person. It was as a reflection upon them as parents. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, the beach, that's the thing about the beach. It's a classless place. You can meet people from other class, and there's a risk there. And actually, just a couple of years before Gidget, you have a movie called The Careless Years, which is also a film on Santa Monica, which is based on a novel, and where a girl from an upper class background meets a working class boy. And where do they meet? Where do they have their first kiss? On the beach. Because it's a neutral space. You don't have reminders of their social background. And so I think the beach is a great place for Hollywood directors to set up that idea that this is a place where those social classes kind of disappear and you can have those encounters. And another movie actually that's from a completely different era is Valley Girl, where and you know what? Nicolas Cage meets this girl from a nicer background, like he's a working class boy. And where do they meet? At some sort of like bonfire party, or it's on the beach. I can't remember exactly, but it's also on the beach. So the beach has always been a place where Hollywood directors have played with these idea of like class, breaching the class divide.
It's amazing because my son is 16 right now, and he is reading Shakespeare in high school, and Romeo and Juliet, and I'm thinking about class divides and things like that. And you're talking about this, and I had never really thought about specifically that. Yeah, of course, the beach is this open ground where, and you see this in the films, and I hadn't even conceptualized it until you said it specifically. You've got, we'll get into Big Kahuna in a second, right? This failed guy and blah, blah, blah. But you're absolutely right. This is a space, this uncontrolled space that probably gives parents pause because they can't control it, right? Which is maybe why the parents are so intent on fixing her up with the guy, which we'll get to here in a sec. All right. I think for a lot of people, you listened to the podcast that we did on Point Break with Scott Latterman. It's no secret that I am fascinated with beach history. I am determined to get Kelly Slater on here to talk about the Endless Summer. And when that happens, I want you back on to get. I am going to get Kelly Slater. I'm going to play the Florida angle. I want Kelly Slater on here because he's the GOAT. This film changes surf history forever. Yeah. Changes the way that changes the sport. This has been well documented by Matt Warshaw, other scholars of surf history and things like that. But I was hoping maybe you could also expand upon this. Because when the girls are trying to get the guys' attention, they're not focused on them. They're focused. They're looking at waves, and they're about to bring out these big pieces of lumber and go out on the water. And you hit Malibu, which has a specific spot, specific history to surfing itself. Can we talk about first before we talk about the effect of Gidget on surfing? Can we talk about the influence of Hawaii on the California shoreline?
Yeah, no, it's huge. Yeah, I mean, in the book, I explain basically there are three major sources for what you would call the California beach culture, which is so influential. And like, we all know what it means when you say like a California beach culture, you imagine like a palm tree, a Pamela Anderson person, like a blonde with like big breasts and all that. Well, so the three origins are the obsession with sports, with the so-called cult of the body, which has deep roots in the early 20th century California around health and the sun and all these people coming to California for better health. The second source is Hollywood, which is hugely influential for the beach culture, the fact that all these movie people are setting up on the beach and filming on the beach, etc. But the third, of course, is Hawaii. There are deep economic and cultural relationship between Hawaii and LA, and it's largely for because of these young men like Duke Kahanamoku, who's mentioned by Scott Latterman, of course, very important figure in surfing history, but also George Freed, who are these two Hawaiians who come to LA in the early 20th century in Southern California and and they're hired to give surfing demonstrations. And they bring the sports with them. And not only do they bring the sports with them, but they take up jobs in LA as life-saving as lifesavers, as lifeguards, if you want. The first time you have lifeguards, these are these men, because they're incredible swimmers, but also they can use their surfboards also as devices to save people from drowning, which is a huge problem in the 20s when these resorts are developing in LA, because people don't know how to swim. So these men, Duke Kahanamoku and George Freeth, they not only bring surfing, but they get all these lifesavers to take up the sports as well, and it has an influence. They basically start those the surfing subculture in Southern California, and they're part of that group of young men that go back and forth throughout the first half of the 20th century between Hawaii and LA. And you have a lot of these men. Tom Blake is another one who's famous for having, spread and documented the rise of this surfing culture in Hawaii and LA. And so they go back and forth, and they're they bring that culture on both sides. And so Hawaii is huge. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I know Greg Knoll comes out of Southern California as well, at surfing down at Windansea, I think it is, where they're going out of. And there's so much here. Let's talk about now. You've got this influence of Hawaii onto California. Let's talk about how this is now mirrored back through Gidget. What does Gidget do to surf culture globally?
Yeah, all right. So first, I should preface whatever I'm going to say by saying that I am not a surf historian. I feel like surf history is its own little niche where the people, they all surf and they're all
we're dropping in on their wave now, Elsa. Is what we're doing. We're going to fight off the locals here. We're going to just drop in right on top of them.
Okay, all right. So I'm not a surf historian, but yeah, the sense is at the time, basically, Gidget is a movie that shows Malibu before it became huge, before it became big, before the plastic era. I would say that Gidget is an insight into the pre-plastic Malibu. And when I say plastic, is because, the revolution that is the advent of the foam board, of the plastic foam boards, which make them more less expensive, more affordable for young Californians, but also easier to maneuver, easier to put on top of a car, easier for a girl to carry around.
We see that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're in Gidget. The surfboards are all wood. They're all the balsa wood. All kinds, although they're not very as long as the ones that Duke Kahanamoku or George Freeth used, which are enormous. They're twice
the guns. Yeah.
So they're more and they're probably more evolved versions that are hollow inside, which is Tom Blake is the guy that develops a hollow board. So they're more maneuverable already. But it's the pre-plastic era. You have very few people on the beaches. They're not yet crowded like they will be in the 60s when you have the Beach Boys, when everybody just becomes obsessed with the beach culture of California, which is what I explained. Between 1960 and 1966, let's say, America is obsessed with the beach culture, the California beach culture. There's so much happening around there, whether it is music, in novels, in films, in fashion, even in makeup. It's all about, or in hairstyle, looking like a California beach bunny or looking like a California beach surfer. That's all people care about, especially the youth.
Yeah, we get. I want to ask about this. You just keyed on this term, this term beach bunny a second ago, and then of course we also have the idea of Big Kahuna, right? Who is a quote unquote surf bum.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of wondering, are surfers, did you in the archive come across, were there prejudices against maybe surfers at the time period or anything like that? Did you see in the policing of the beach differences, the way people were approached?
Yeah, so what's interesting about the beach bum, it's that phrase you find constantly in the sources in the archive, the beach bum, they're obsessed with this idea. And surfers are the ultimate beach bum, and they're caught a bit in between two opinions people have about surfers. On the one hand, they're delinquents for sure. They're drinking beer on the beach. They're not working. They're just spending the day on the sand and on the waves, and they destroy the beaches. They litter. They trespass on private property. they're wannabe delinquent. But on the other hand, you also have a discourse that's about how surf is a great sport. It shapes the body. And we're at a time when the soft body of the Americans is generating a lot of anxiety among parents. And, it's the time Kennedy starts his old programs to get Americans back in shape. There's, it's the starting point of the obesity crisis and all that. So this idea that surfing creates good, fit, thin bodies in particular, whether for men or women, there's this sense, okay, that's actually good. That's a healthy sport. But the problem, of course, is that it has these elements about surfing that makes it a bit of a marginal, its own world, a bit cultish. And you see it in Gidget. There's the temptation of dropping out of society, which is what Moondoggy wants to do instead of being the upstanding college man he's supposed to be. There's a temptation to drop out, and so you have the hints of the 60s there, of course, and you have the ultimate bum, the big Kahuna who dropped out and just lives, follows the sun year long.
Can I tell you that this film had far more moral quandary than I was expecting for it to have. The whole big Kahuna thing, where we find out that he's a Korea War Air Force vet, and he's just given up, and he's like, I'm just going to surf. And I looked it up. The guy plays him is 35 at this point in time, which
he does look 35.
He looks older than me, and I'm 46. And I was like, he just looks worn down.
It's all that sun, Jason. It's not good for your skin.
I should tell you, I have my paddleboard in my garage out here, which is doing a lot of good in the mountains of Colorado right now, but I was not going to give it up. I actually want to ask you about veterans. I know that right now in the U.S., we've got this show, Masters of the Air, that's going on, which we're also doing a pod on at the moment. The war still remains large, and World War II remains large in the American psyche, I would imagine, as well in the UK and also in France. But I'm kind of wondering, what's happening to these veterans as they come back from, say, World War II, even Korea? Are they going to the beach? Are veterans going as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing is, during the war, the beach is a place where soldiers go. They have access to certain beach clubs as a place to, get back in shape, train. So a lot of those historians who've worked on LA during World War II, they show, Arthur Verge, they show that these men, they remember their time in LA. LA is obviously a place where a lot of people are stopping on the way to the Pacific, and they remember their time in LA, and they want to go back to that, fantastic place where you can go to the beach and have a big city as well, a big city life as well. So loads of those veterans come back, and they're they want to have a family there, and they absolutely are, they come back and they want that beach life. Now, the specific case of the big Kahuna being a Korean Air Force veterans, I don't know how much that is inspired from reality, but that's definitely true that during the war, the beach is a place where soldiers go to have fun and spend time.
All right, I want to ask you. You're an environmental historian. I want to dive into some environmental stuff here. Specifically, first, I'll talk about some animals. We're going to talk about the beach. Yeah, we actually see Gidget get caught up in the kelp. I'm thinking, oh, there are seals there. And then I'm like, where there are seals, there are sharks. This film comes out 16 years before Jaws, which in my mind now is no longer the gap that it once was. 16 years is like nothing now. 16 years, I was 30 and 16 years ago is nothing. I was so liberated and free. So I wonder, do you in the archive come across concerns over wildlife management, over sharks, over seals? What do you see? Is there a dialogue about engaging with wildlife on the beach in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s?
I didn't find much. The one thing that comes back again and again is the grunion. The grunion runs. So the grunion is a fish that has the particularity of spawning on the beach. And so it's very easy to catch them because they spawn at night all at the same time. And so you have fishes basically, I don't know, I've never done a grunion run, but I imagine that's people would go have these grunion runs, come at a particular time when the fishes are about to spawn, and just catch them into the air without anything but their hands. And that's a California tradition, which unfortunately is declining due to climate change and its effects on species. So Actually, I have no sharks for you, I'm afraid, Jason.
Wow.
In my archives, I have no shark story really to tell, and no seal story. I mean, they did like completely, develop those marshland area that became Marina del Rey and became LAX. So those areas were developed, and in doing that, we removed a lot of areas that probably hosted loads of species, migratory birds, etc. But it's not a big thing in LA. I don't know. Maybe another historian will find that I was completely wrong, and there's loads to say about it. But.
No, it's well, I think that's part of the reason why like Jaws kind of changed the way we looked at the movies, because it really kind of interjected sharks into the dialogue with the ocean, I think, in ways we just weren't thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really see sharks in a lot of these films, even though when you talk to surfers, they're clearly on their minds, especially out in Hawaii and other places. So I'm always interested to see the representation in film and time.
Mm-hmm.
But here's another thing that's not really depicted on screen that I really wanted to ask you about. And this is everyone's mind. I flip on Twitter now and I see all these houses about to collapse into the ocean in California due to the rains. And I got to tell you, I'm a little the chaos guy in me goes, go, just fall, just collapse into the ocean, just go. We see references to it obliquely about the growing beach scene. Can you talk a little bit about development? How maybe beach adjacent construction development happens throughout, say, the 20s to the 60s? What's going on here?
So development along the beach happens quite haphazardly. Like just people develop throughout the 20th century without much regulation up until the 70s, which is when you have in 1972 the creation of the California Coastal Commission, which is the state agency that can accept permits basically to build anything close to the beach or on the beach. And that's when you're going to have like real regulations in place. And honestly, we have to thank the California Coastal Commission and those 1970s activists for having, relatively preserved like large chunks of the coastline. As much as it is developed, nonetheless, we have like a still pretty, good coastline in LA, thanks, and throughout the state of California, thanks to the California Coastal Commission. I think what's striking to me from watching Gidget was like seeing those like tiny little beach house, like where she goes to potentially have sex, with the big kahuna. It's a tiny
That was a weird part. Boy, did I feel weird about that, but go ahead.
Yeah. So it's a beach bungalow. It's a typical beach bungalow from the 50s. And I would imagine today that we have fewer and fewer of these left. Why? Because those would have been demolished, and instead you'd build like a bigger, shinier mansion with a pool, et cetera, which the California Coastal Commission prevents to some extent happening, or they give permits, but in exchange they ask for the owner to open up a pathway to the beach. That's the sort of the type of exchange that the California Coastal Commission has done a lot. Like, okay, we let you expand and build bigger, but you have to have a lateral pathway along your house leading to the beach so that people have access to the sand, have access to the public sands of Malibu. Because I think one of the first things I should have said really about Malibu is that that's the big problem with Malibu. It's just very difficult to access. Like there's only one, it's the Pacific Highway that leads there, right? There's limited amount of parking. There's limited access point to the coastline, especially prior to the 70s and the creation of the California Coastal Commission. So those beaches, like Leo Carrillo that we see in the film, unless you're someone local that knows the person, who can open the side of who can open their fence and let you go on the beach, there's just no way you can access the beach, because basically between the Pacific Coast Highway and the beach, you have that land, that piece of private land where people have set up their house. So that's a bit sad, but like the view along the Pacific Coast Highway in some places is just, fences, garages. It's just ugly. And it's sad because it's one of the most beautiful places on earth.
Are there parts of this movie that drive you nuts?
I think rewatching it, well, first of all, Moondog is a sellout. Let's establish that. I mean, he's a complete sellout. Has those big dreams and then boom, just goes back into the rank. No, I think what really struck me is looking back on it, and because I did a bit of research, preparing for this, is Sandra Dee as this tiny girl whose physique is really highlighted because she's Gidget, the girl midget. She's so tiny and dainty. And what's striking to me is that this woman, I didn't know, but she has this background as a child model. She dealt with sexual abuse. She dealt with anorexia, and was probably, who knows? She might have been still dealing with anorexia at the time. She's tiny. I mean, and she's supposed to be portraying a like athletic young woman, who can like surf and swim all day, like that. Not the body you'd have if you're an actual surfer. I mean, that's my sense that this is the Hollywood version of what a young girl should look like, but actually a surfing girl would have muscles, would have, she would have the famous knobs on her knees, and that's what I found in the archives is like those early surfers from the 50s and 60s. They're like, they want to be surfing those young women, but they also want to be girls, and so they say, oh, you need to take care of your knees, you need to take care of your hair, and yeah, so. That for me, the Sandra Dee as a surfer, I just don't buy it, and I also speaks to the body issues in Hollywood in general, and particularly in that period. And this woman actually, Sandra Dee, died in her 60s. I read that from anorexia related, like it affected her kidney, and she died from kidney disease. So that drove me crazy a little bit. And then what drove me crazy, I guess, maybe is the whole thing about damsel in distress. Like, she's rescued not once but twice by Moondoggie. Like, twice. Like, if you're a surfer, you know how to, like, you're not gonna like drown, so that pissed me off a little.
The part of the pushing her down into the kelp,
oh my god,
was it's like, really, that's courting in 1959, I guess. Not a fan of Moondoggie or really anybody else in this movie.
But that was quite realistic, though. If you're going to like be like, if it's a ritual, I could imagine that as a ritual that surfers would do with each other. And they were treating her like one of their own. So that was kind of, I bought that as a scene. Like, I thought it was quite realistic.
Well, there's a bit here, and we actually see this in Point Break too, of like breaking into the surfer clique, right? Where early on, it's set up. Her girlfriends are constantly saying, "Well, you're a tomboy, and maybe that makes it possible for her to kind of infiltrate this group of guys who very much do kind of roughhouse her, throughout the first majority, and even like, you can't go to the party. That's not a space for I don't know. Moondoggie shows back up in the sequel when they go to Hawaii.
Yeah. He does, of course. Yeah.
But Sandra Dee does not, because she can't get out of her movie contract. So there's a completely different Gidget. And I was like, what? Because I started watching it and be like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't separate it. And you're absolutely right. So I read on about Sandra Dee. She has a baby, like within a few years. She's married, I think, the next year, 2 years afterwards, has a baby. And there are these comments that she has about like how she has to perform in her personal life. She talks about how she talks about how in the era she's a very heavy smoker by the time she's 25. She's like, I have to hide this from the audience and all these kinds of things because people want to see me as Gidget always, And I think those body issues probably, I don't want to assume, but I'm going to assume probably stayed with her in part because of perceptions of who she is from her younger career.
I mean, another thing, did you notice, Jason, that sort of like closeted lesbian character? I mean, that girl with the short hair? I was like, are you sure you really are dating that guy? She has a pin from like her fraternity, the fraternity pin of her boyfriend. I'm like, you don't look like someone who likes boys.
Yeah, actually, I would love to see, and I'm sure there's work out there about this. But as far as histories of like gay, lesbian histories of the beach, and what does that mean? Especially maybe in this era where you're having to, but a lot of people are closeted, I would assume, and maybe this character is. And I wonder, Elsa, if that's a subtle nod to that, or if that just.
Yeah. I really wonder, because honestly, she definitely looks like a butch lesbian hidden in the movie somehow. Like her demeanor is very masculine,
very much
short hair, and she's not like the other. I mean, I found that it was a very weird character, and I was like,
but they're not talking about her as a tomboy.
No, they're not. It's just
she's got a guy. She's got the pin, right?
Yeah, she's got the pin, so she's safe. She can have short hair. She can be a bit mannish, but it's very weird. Yeah.
It's interesting because we actually just on the Sunday night thing that we've done for the last several years, we just did a film, Fried Green Tomatoes, which I did not know which is a very queer film, and I had no idea about this film. I'd never seen it before. Mm-hmm. And the way that film was projected, even for audiences, I think the film comes out in say 89, 90, somewhere in there. That was very much a lesbian love story that was kind of out in front of everybody, but never stating as much. So where we see these glimpses of homosexuality, queerness, in film are, I guess these are things that I'm becoming more and more aware of as I start to learn more about film history and how these representations come across. I want to ask about your book, because I just love your book. I'm so excited to get the English version of this book in spiral-bound copy. I'm getting a French version too.
The cover's not as cool.
I love this cover. Oh my gosh, I am such a sucker for that. When I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh. Did you get to choose the cover?
No, but interestingly enough, I did recommend a photograph by the same photographer, George Tate, who was this guy who was at the beach all the time, took a lot of photographs of Muscle Beach. So that's a photograph from Muscle Beach at the time, the original Muscle Beach, and not the Arnold Schwarzenegger 70s one, the original 1940s, 1950s one in Santa Monica. So I'm really glad they picked that photograph. Yeah.
Now I want to ask you about the actual physical production of the book. Like when it comes down to it, did you get to choose the title? Did they give you options? How does that work for you? With the press, because you went through it. OUP, was it? With this press?
It's OUP. Yeah, it was great working with them. And so Senrush is actually the literal translation from the French title. So they liked that title, and that was good. La Rue et vers le Sable became Senrush, and that was fine. But the subtitle was a bit of a difficult one for the French. You could tell that the film was not yet, the book was not yet mature enough, because I gave the French title, and the subtitle was An Environmental History of the Los Angeles Beaches. But it's so much more than an environmental history of Los Angeles beaches. It's a social history, it's a cultural history, it's a history focused on race, on urban planning. So but you know what? That still reflected the grad student in me. And so for the OUP version of the book, I was like, no, I need to find something that it's about how the modern beach was reinvented in LA. It's where like our expectations of what a beach should be like, they all came from LA in the 20th century. So I need to find a title that reflects that. And so I suggested Reinventing the Beach in 20th Century LA. And they said, oh yeah, those kind of like reinventing, that kind of like title is a bit passé, is a bit like overdone. And so they wanted a how blah 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 made the beaches type of title, which are very popular. And I realized that all the books that came out in the last 5 years have a how blah 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 did blah blah blah. That's the popular title. But in the end, they kind of followed my lead, but made it more appealing, I think, to a broader audience, to the infamous, general reader, the revival of the beach. But I like it. I mean, it's all them, that subtitle. So I give it to OUP for their work.
Listen, as a guy who came up through like a very traditional Southern Baptist household in Kentucky, in the South, growing up, like the revival, that's speaking my language. I see revival. I'm like, let's go. There's gonna be a party. There's gonna be some fried chicken here somewhere. I'm gonna jump in. I want to talk about people who want to learn more about your work via other works. Absolutely go read this book. I'm going to tweet the hell out of it. But what other stuff did you find as you were writing this? Were there influential books where you're like, gosh, I want more people to know about this scholar? We talked about a few folks already. Are there people that you find like, and this doesn't have to be tied to say beaches or Los Angeles, it could be anything. What are the works that really get you excited, that really kind of created the mind space for the creation of this book?
Well, so it's great to hear, Jason, that you love this book, that you're excited about a beach book. But let's kind of like for a moment rewind and think of like grad student Elsa, who is trying to sell this idea of a book about beaches as a serious topic. And believe me, it wasn't that easy. People would not actually take you seriously because they associate you with your with your book topic, with your PhD topic. So you work about beaches, surely it's only about bathing suits, and it's not very interesting. It's not real history. It's not political history. It's not things that matter. And so when I was a grad student, one historian that I really looked up to, it was Andrew Carl, who wrote this fantastic book on Black beaches in the South, and who sort of opened up the way for me to be taken seriously as a beach historian. That's kind of like I see it. So yeah, big shout out to Andrew Carl. His first book, The Land Was Ours, How Black Beaches Became White Wealth. I think that's the full title, with University of North Carolina Press. He's such a fantastic writer, and he really unearthed that story about those beaches in the South that used to be Black owned, and that, and the dispossession that happened as beaches became these places where you could profit from, either as a place for tourism or as a place for developers. And that's first of all a story that needs to be told, because it's a story of injustice, but it's also a story that goes to show how much coastlines weren't looked at properly by historians before, and how they need to be taken seriously. It's not just about the beach swim-ins of the 60s, even though these are important. There are so many more stories about race, about the beaches that are crucial to American history in general. So Andrew Call, all his books thereafter, also Free the Beaches, the second is very good as well. And he moves to Connecticut and in the 70s in that book. Other inspirations. I love Eric Avila's book on popular culture in the age of white flight. And it's a very famous book about LA and about race, and about it's an urban cultural history of LA. And I still find this book, wonderful. I'm not the only one who loves Eric Avila's book, but the way he manages to bring together social history, cultural history, film, urban planning, it's just a master of weaving in all these kinds of histories. And yeah, I'm a big fan. Lawrence Culver's book on Southern California, The Frontier of Leisure, for me was the first book that really took seriously, decided that California had this enormous influence over the US through selling leisure as a way of life. That was extremely influential for my book. That's who I think of at the moment.
Do you have beach movies you like?
Define beach movie, Jason.
No. You, Elsa, are the person who just wrote a book on beaches. You define. Okay. I'm just a hillbilly from Kentucky. Come on.
Well, I love Point Break. I will say that, because Keanu Reeves is just unbelievably handsome in that movie, first of all. And it's just a very good movie. It's a very entertaining movie. Unfortunately, I wouldn't really recommend the Beach Party movies that came out. The Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello. I wouldn't recommend those because they are extremely silly. They're fantastic for the historian to study, but I wouldn't say exactly they're great movies. There are movies that have certain beach scenes that I really like Mildred Pierce, which is a fantastic classic Hollywood movies of I think it's a 1945 movie. And it starts at the beach, actually, with a murder in a beach house. So Mildred Pierce, if you haven't seen it, it has really cool beach scenes. Let me think. If you're into 1970s era masculinity, I really like Lifeguards, which is a bit of a niche film that portrays, that focuses on the life of a lifeguard who finds himself in the 70s and whose masculinity is being challenged, because this is the era where you should be making money as a man and not spending your time on the beach like some sort of 15-year-old. And I really like that movie. But honestly, beach movies are not. You can watch Baywatch, the 2017.
No, do we have to? I was going to ask you. Do we have to bring that up?
You can watch it, but more of a.
Can a person watch Baywatch all the way through at once?
I did. I had to watch it, and you know what? I think if you prepare yourself for a bad movie so bad it's good, then I think you may appreciate Baywatch. what it brings, you know?
Can I tell you, I saw this morning that The Rock and Emily Blunt are getting ready to sign on for another film. And I thought, and I love The Rock, but why does he keep making movies? They're so bad. And Baywatch, and he says like Baywatch is the worst of them. It's a lot.
Yeah, lots of penis jokes, that are a bit uncomfortable, but yeah.
Oh, at some point in time, we'll have to come back and talk about Baywatch as a series on this, and really kind of break down the David Hasselhoff, Pamela Anderson, Kelly Slater's in Baywatch. So for a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Final question here. Let's bring this all the way back home to Gidget. Elsa, is Gidget a history movie?
I mean, it's a great movie to teach. You know, that's what I thought, like watching it again to prepare this podcast. I'm like, why am I not assigning Gidget? I mean, it's a great movie to talk about, like, you know, it's a great movie to talk about that really moment where the US is on the brink of the 60s. You know, it's a great movie to analyze that moment where the US still has a foot in the 50s. You know, you still have that sort of like very parent-focused little family where the women and the men have these very prescriptive gender roles. I mean, it's very 50s, but you already have a foot in it. There's already that sense of like, you know, challenging those norms, that potential dropping out of the rat race, you know, that Moondoggy embodies.
Mm-hmm.
You have all that's sort of like in preparation already. So I would absolutely assign it to students. Interestingly enough, I assigned another Sandra Dee movie. Which is from the same year, which I didn't realize, which is Imitation of Life.
Oh,
I don't know if you've watched it, but it's a
not
great
familiar
movie.
with it.
It's a great movie because of the matters of race, because it's about like a white woman with a young daughter, single parenting her young daughter, who takes in a black woman with her daughter who is basically white passing. And it's the story of those two women raising their two daughters through the 60s, with one of them passing off as white. And Sandra Dee Young plays the role of the white daughter who's raised alongside that black daughter. And it's a fascinating movie to think about race at a time, you know, during the civil rights. But actually, Gidget is also a very interesting movie that you can look from other angles. Even race, you know, even though it's not there, it's there by being completely absent. And so
I found it to be just a stunning like watch through. I had no reason to watch it until your book came out, and I'm so glad to first of all get a chance to meet you. I got to read your work and then watch this movie and then talk about it with you. So this has been amazing. Thank you. I know you're like, 45 hours ahead of me. I don't even know what time it is. It's probably Thursday where you are. I don't even know. I think you're 7 hours ahead of me right now.
I'm not quite that far. It's still Tuesday and 6:30
Barely.
PM.
Oh my gosh, it's so late over. Elsa, thank you so much for being. Where can people find you online? They have questions about your work. Where can people find you?
Oh, I'm afraid I'm still on Twitter, or X, as we're supposed to call it. I guess I'm on Blue Sky, although, you know, really just dipping my toes. So yeah, they can find me there. And yeah.
Awesome. Elsa,
it's been great. Thank you. Well, thank you to you. Thanks to you, Jason. It's been awesome.
And you tell everybody at Northumbria, that's it. There's no more coming on. That we've drawn the line at 3. So you rock. Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Well, thank you again, Jason.
And that's a wrap here at Historians of the Movies podcast. Thank you so very much to our guest, Elsa Devienne. Elsa, that was awesome. Thank you so very much for being here and being part of this. Thank you, of course, to our producer, Fletcher Powell, for making this show happen. And, of course, thank you to all of you for continuing to listen in, to share this podcast with your friends, share it on social media. If you want to sponsor or know someone who does want to sponsor the pod, please do let us know. And of course, if there are films that you want on this podcast, if there are guests that you want on this podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out. So this was awesome, and thank you guys so very, very much. Ciao for now. Bye.